You might assume that putting up a gate on your driveway wouldn't trigger a neighborhood uproar, but here I am, sharing this experience. The past few weeks have been nothing short of chaotic, and I still can't wrap my head around how things blew up over something so mundane. Let me begin from the start. Several months back, I chose to install a new gate at the entrance of my driveway. My home is situated at the end of a cul-de-sac, making my driveway quite lengthy and gently curving, providing some seclusion to my property. I thought a gate would enhance security and prevent the neighborhood children from frequently riding their bikes up and down my driveway. This actually happens more often than you'd expect. Plus, it simply looked attractive. Nothing flashy, just an elegant black wrought iron gate that complemented my house's style. I obtained all the required permits, thoroughly reviewed my HOA guidelines, more on that shortly, and hired a contractor to handle the installation. Everything proceeded without any hitches. The day following the gate installation, I saw Laura standing across the street, arms folded, gazing at it. Initially, I assumed she was just curious. She didn't approach me then, but there was something unsettling about her stationary stance. You know that sensation when you feel someone is observing you, but they're trying to act indifferent? Exactly. A few days later, I began receiving emails from the HOA. The first one seemed harmless, containing information about upcoming community events and reminders about lawn upkeep. However, at the very end, there was a notice. Please be aware that all exterior property modifications must adhere to HOA guidelines. Failure to obtain prior approval may lead to fines or other consequences. Strange. I had already meticulously checked the HOA rules before putting up the gate, and there was no indication that gates were forbidden. Additionally, I had never been informed by the HOA about needing prior consent for something like this. Nevertheless, I dismissed it. I assumed it was a standard reminder and paid it no mind. Soon, violation notices began to appear. One morning, I discovered a letter taped to my mailbox. It was an official-looking HOA notice, accusing me of having an unauthorized structure on my property. It was vague, offering no specific details or references to the guidelines I was supposedly violating. Of course, I reached out to the HOA for clarification, attaching photos of the gate, the city permits, and even screenshots of the guidelines. No reply. A few days later, another violation notice surfaced, this time threatening a $500 fine if I didn't remove the structure within 2 weeks. That's when I realized this wasn't merely a misunderstanding. This was targeted. I decided to address Laura at the upcoming HOA meeting. She's the president, after all, and I figured she'd clarify the issue. When I raised the concern, she offered a fake smile and said, "Oh, Michael, it's just that the gate doesn't fit with the neighborhood's aesthetic. Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Hope you can help me reach this dream." Now back to the story. We aim to preserve property values, you understand. However, my gate wasn't the first in the neighborhood to adhere to this aesthetic. In fact, there were at least 3 other houses with driveway gates, some older, some newer, and none of them had ever caused any issues. I pointed this out, and her smile wavered for a moment before she responded. "Those were grandfathered in. Your gate is different. It's making the neighborhood appear closed off." Closed off? It's just a gate. At this stage, a few other HOA members spoke up, agreeing that my gate looked appropriate and that the guidelines didn't explicitly forbid it. Laura dismissed their input, mentioning something about needing to review the bylaws more thoroughly. It was clear she had no solid ground, but she refused to concede. After the meeting, things became even stranger. Laura began frequently appearing near my house. Once, I saw her standing on the sidewalk across the street, pretending to walk her dog while intensely staring at my gate. Another time, she drove by slowly while I was mowing the lawn. She even had the audacity to stop and say, "You know, Michael, the HOA is really enforcing violations. You might want to consider removing that gate before things escalate." Escalate? What was she implying? I wasn't going to yield. I'm not the type of person to let someone intimidate me into giving up, especially when I knew I was in the right. So, I decided to investigate further. I reviewed the HOA bylaws once more, scrutinizing them thoroughly. As I expected, there was absolutely nothing against gates. In fact, the regulations specifically mentioned that exterior modifications only required approval if they surpassed a certain height or obstructed visibility, neither of which applied to my gate. Armed with this knowledge, I sent another email to the HOA, including all board members and attaching the bylaws for reference. I made it clear that unless they could present specific evidence that my gate breached any rules, I wouldn't remove it or pay any fines. No reply. But the following morning, I saw Laura on the sidewalk again, this time holding a tape measure. "Laura, can I assist you with something?" I called out, attempting to keep my tone friendly. She startled, evidently not expecting me to be there, and stammered, "Oh, I was just, checking the easement. You know, to ensure the gate isn't obstructing it." Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The gate was well within my property boundaries, as verified by the city permit. But Laura seemed indifferent. She muttered something about property values again and walked away, leaving me standing there shaking my head. That's when it dawned on me. This wasn't about the gate. It was about control. Laura didn't like that I'd made a decision without her consent, and she was determined to make me pay for it. If you thought Laura's behavior was limited to passive-aggressive notes and sidewalk tape measuring, think again. I wasn't prepared for what followed. Honestly, I don't think she was either. It all began about a week after I saw Laura measuring my property line as if she were auditioning for an episode of CSI Suburbia. Things had been unnervingly quiet. No emails, no violation notices, no suspiciously slow drives past my house. For a moment, I almost believed she'd finally given up. But then, one bright Saturday morning, I went outside to collect the mail and noticed 2 police cars parked just a few houses down. My first thought was, yikes, I hope everyone's okay. My second thought was, why are they heading towards my house? Sure enough, 2 officers approached my driveway while Laura stood across the street, phone in hand, pretending not to watch but clearly observing. The officers were courteous but assertive. One of them, a man in his early 40s with a weary expression that said, "I don't get paid enough for this," explained they'd received a complaint about a structure blocking public access. I couldn't help but laugh. "You mean my gate? The one that's entirely on my property and doesn't block anything?" The officer shrugged. "We're just here to inspect it." I led them over to the gate, highlighting the clear property line markers and the fact that the gate was a solid 3 feet inside those boundaries. I even showed them the permits I'd obtained from the city, along with the email correspondence confirming everything was approved. The second officer, a younger man who seemed unimpressed, nodded and said, "Yeah, this doesn't appear to be an issue to me." Meanwhile, Laura was still lingering across the street. When the officers glanced in her direction, she waved as if at a parade. "You might want to speak with her," I suggested. The older officer sighed, muttered something under his breath, and walked across the street. I stayed where I was, leaning against the gate with my arms crossed, observing the situation unfold. Laura put on her most concerned citizen act, gesturing dramatically toward my house, and at one point, pulling out what looked like a binder. I couldn't hear all of her comments, but I caught phrases like devaluing the neighborhood, dangerous precedent, and I've had multiple complaints. The officer listened patiently for a few minutes before interrupting her. He said something that caused her face to flush bright red, and she immediately ceased speaking. The younger officer returned to me and said, "You're all set. Sorry for the disturbance." And just like that, they left. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated Laura's determination to be a nuisance. A few days later, I received an email announcing an emergency HOA meeting to discuss recent neighborhood issues. The email didn't specify my name, but it was obvious what it was about. I decided to attend, not because I expected anything productive, but because I wanted to see how far Laura was willing to take this absurdity. The meeting took place at the community center, and the atmosphere was tense from the moment I entered. Laura was already there, sitting at the head of the table with her dreaded binder and a smug look that made me want to flip the table. Emily, one of the more reasonable HOA board members, gave me a sympathetic smile as I took my seat. Robert, a neighbor I had always gotten along with, leaned over and whispered, "You're about to be the star of the show." The meeting began with Laura delivering a prepared statement about the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards and ensuring community harmony. It was all very vague and theatrical, and she didn't directly mention my gate at first. And then she opened her binder and began flipping through the pages. "We've recently had an issue with an unauthorized structure that violates HOA guidelines," she stated, looking straight at me. I raised my hand. "Are you referring to my gate?" Laura hesitated, clearly not expecting me to call her out so swiftly. "Well, if the shoe fits." I couldn't help but smirk. "Okay, let's discuss the guidelines then, because I've read them thoroughly and there's nothing that prohibits gates. In fact, there are 3 other homes in this neighborhood with gates, and none of them have ever been a problem." Laura's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Those were grandfathered in. Your gate is a new installation, and it's—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Not in keeping with the neighborhood's aesthetic." I glanced around the room. "Does anyone else here think my gate is an eyesore?" Emily spoke up. "I think it looks fine. It's well maintained and matches the style of your house." Robert nodded. "Honestly, I didn't even notice it until all this started." Laura's face reddened again. "This isn't a popularity contest," she snapped. "It's about the rules." I leaned back in my chair. "Great, then show me the rule I'm violating." She flipped through her binder again, muttering under her breath, but didn't present anything concrete. That's because there wasn't anything. As the meeting progressed, it became evident that most of the other board members, and even some neighbors, were weary of Laura's antics. At one point, Robert said, "It feels like you're targeting Michael for no reason. If there's a legitimate issue, just state it. Otherwise, drop it." Laura seemed on the verge of losing her composure. "I'm just trying to do my job," she responded through gritted teeth. "Your job is to enforce the rules fairly," I retorted, "not to invent them as you go along." By the meeting's end, Laura was visibly shaken. The board decided to drop the issue entirely, and Emily even apologized to me afterward, saying, "I think she's just used to people not pushing back." Following the emergency HOA meeting, where Laura's attempts to target me failed, I believed she might finally relent. For a week, everything was pleasantly normal. No emails, no violation notices, no creepy drives by my house while she pretended to inspect my landscaping. I let my guard down. Big mistake. One Saturday afternoon, while I was outside washing my car, Robert, my neighbor, approached me. He looked somewhat uneasy, glancing over his shoulder as if he didn't want anyone to see him talking to me. "Hey, Michael," he began. "Can I ask you something odd?" "Sure," I replied. "What's up?" Robert hesitated. "Have you noticed someone walking around your property at night?" "What do you mean?" "Look, I don't want to seem paranoid, but a few nights ago I was on my porch and I saw someone near your gate. They had a flashlight." I was initially unsure how to interpret that. Was someone genuinely snooping around my house? Or was Robert mistaken? Either way, I thanked him and decided to stay vigilant. That night, I set up a motion-activated camera near the gate. I wasn't expecting to catch anything, but I thought it was worth a try. Sure enough, the first 2 nights showed nothing unusual, just some raccoons rummaging through my trash cans. But on the 3rd night, I struck gold. The camera captured Laura. She was dressed in black, seriously, as if on a secret mission, and was shining a flashlight on my gate. At one point, she even attempted to tug on it, as if she believed she could somehow remove it with her bare hands. I couldn't believe my eyes. This wasn't just petty behavior. It was downright insane. The next morning, I sent the footage to Emily, the reasonable board member who had supported me during the HOA meeting. I kept my message brief. "Not sure if this is something the board wants to address, but I thought you should see it." Emily called me back less than an hour later. "Michael," she said, sounding both shocked and amused, "you're not going to believe this, but Laura has been filing violation notices about your gate without board approval. We're having an internal meeting about it tonight." That evening, I received a call from Robert. "You need to attend the HOA meeting," he said, barely able to contain his laughter. "It's not technically open to homeowners, but trust me, you'll want to hear this." I decided to stay home and play it cool, but Robert kept me informed via text. Apparently, when the board confronted Laura about the violation notices, she completely lost her composure. She attempted to claim she was merely doing her job as president, but Emily pointed out that issuing violations without board approval was a blatant breach of HOA protocol. Then, Robert texted me something that made my jaw drop. "She's accusing you of forging the permits for the gate. Emily is asking her for proof." I couldn't believe it. Laura was so desperate to win that she was now accusing me of committing a crime. But it worsened. According to Robert, Laura presented a stack of documents she claimed were evidence of my unauthorized gate. However, those documents were entirely fabricated. Robert texted again. "Emily just called the city planning office. They're confirming your permits are legitimate." That's when things truly fell apart for Laura. With her evidence crumbling and the board turning against her, Laura did the one thing I didn't anticipate. She doubled down. "I'm just trying to protect this community," she shouted, according to Robert. "Michael is making a mockery of the HOA. That gate is damaging property values." By this point, even Laura's few remaining supporters were distancing themselves from her. Emily called for an immediate vote to remove Laura as president, and it passed unanimously. But the best part? Remember how Laura had been sneaking around my property at night? Well, the board was not pleased about that. Emily informed her that the HOA would be conducting an official investigation into her behavior, including her late-night inspections. Laura stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. The next day, I received an email from the HOA officially apologizing for Laura's conduct and confirming that all violation notices related to my gate had been nullified. Emily even visited my house personally to apologize and assure me that Laura was no longer in any position of authority. But the icing on the cake? A few weeks later, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Laura had moved out. Apparently, she couldn't handle the humiliation of being ousted, and her house was already listed for sale. Now, every time I drive into my driveway and see my gate, I can't help but smile.